Hi YouTube. So finally doing, that's rolling. Finally doing the video that I promised about the diagnosis of autism, or my journey on diagnosis. Sorry about that. I wanted to because I think it's different now, but I'm not really sure. But I figure every journey is individual. But when my son was 18 months old, I put him into a private school because I didn't like the daycare business that I had been dealing with. I had a couple two home daycares that I had used, and you know, they had their issues at different points in time. But anyway, so I put him in school, and he was in school for about 6 months. I mean, it's a daycare basically, but they have teachers and stuff in there. He was there about 6 months when the teacher said that he wasn't progressing normally, and she thought that he had a hearing issue. What I should say is, up to this point, my son had met every developmental goal that you should. He talked on time. He walked early. You know, he looked. He moved his head. He did all this stuff. You know, sat up, all that kind of stuff on time. The only thing is he, after 18 months, he did start losing his speech a little bit. He was saying like 2 and 3 word sentences, and then he got down, by the time he was 2 years old, he was like 2 words, and then he went 1 word. But I'm sad to say that he's my only child, so I didn't really notice it. I mean, I sort of noticed it. But anyway, so we took him for a hearing test, and he passed that. And then we started a journey to the diagnosis. The first thing that we did was I contacted the pediatrician, and they sent him for evaluation. And the way they did this evaluation was 4 different providers were in this tiny little room with me and with my son. And, you know, by this time he's 2.5 years old. Sebastian, go. And he was, you know, they were asking him to do things, you know, put blocks on top of each other and different things, and asking him questions and asking me questions, and it was confusing for me, and I'm not autistic. And you know, I found that an extraordinarily unpleasant circumstance, and they didn't really tell me anything except they referred me to somebody else. And this time, you know, the one good thing about that is it made me a better advocate for my son, because I was like, that is never happening again. We are not having 4 different people in a tiny little room asking me questions and him questions. So it made me a better advocate for him. But after that, they had a psychologist and a speech therapist come to my house to evaluate him. And the psychologist was one of the nicest people I've met on this journey. But they were at my home, and they you know, watched Derek, and they asked me individually, you know, to do different things, you know, like, hey, set a block on top of each other, you know, pick up 3 blocks, you know, all that stuff they do with little kids. And he gave me immediate feedback, which is also something that didn't always happen in this whole journey. The speech therapist said yes, she recommended speech therapy, and that she would get the authorization from the pediatrician, which the pediatrician, she was awesome. She worked with us up until she left to go work with poor children. So, but she was awesome. And that's like psychologist, he said, well, you know, he used some tough words with me, you know, developmentally delayed and possibly autistic. And I had no clue what autism meant at all. My only contact with autism was through the movie Rain Man. And my son does not, he's not like that. And it's funny because coming across people who know, or want to know about autism, that's the perception of it. So it's hard because when your child's on the spectrum, there's so many things that can be autistic behavior. But anyway, so we did speech therapy, and just prior to this, I had quit my job, took all my retirement savings out, used it to pay for my life and his life while we were going on this journey, because my employer nationwide was not very sympathetic to all the visits and stuff that I had to do. So I just quit my job because I needed to know what the deal was with my son. So we spent an entire summer having speech therapy, and he did get a little bit better. And the psychologist recommended that I have him evaluated by the local school district. They have a very good autism program. So because of my experiences on this journey, I went to the school and I met with one of the ladies there, and I said, I want to know every single step in this process. I want to know what you're going to do to my child and how it's going to happen, because he's not coming in here and having all this other stuff that happened. I went in there with a legal pad with pages of questions. I spent probably 2 hours with this lady, and she was amazingly gracious. She answered every one of my questions. So I brought him in for an evaluation, and they have these rooms with the two-way windows, and I was in the room for parts of the period of time I was with him, parts of it he was there without me, and he was close to 3 years old, so it was, he did not deal with the separation very good. He cried, and it just broke my heart. But they did their testing, and they came back and said that he was moderately autistic. They recommended putting him in school right away. So I finally decided that that's what we would do, is put him in the school. And, there are many pros and cons about this school. There are a lot of pros. There are a lot of people who moved to my state just to go to that school because they had the picture exchange system. And Derek was almost nonverbal. He had some words, but not a lot of words, like bubbles, and, he didn't say mom anymore. But he had a great teacher that first year. He's had many great teachers, actually. But he had a really great teacher that year, and she helped him learn the picture exchange system. They did tell me some hard things that first year. They told me that he probably wouldn't speak much. They told me that he probably would never read. He would probably never write. And so that was the journey to my son's diagnosis. I'm going to tell you kind of the rest of the story to some of those things. I did use my son as a human guinea pig for a long time, because there are a whole lot of things that you can do when your child is autistic. There are many people who are willing to do all kinds of things. There's diets, there's all kinds of stuff, and at some point I said, I'm not doing any of that anymore. I will only do this stuff with school, and I will work with him. But just so you know, he does read, he does write, and he does talk. I wouldn't let them teach him sign language because I knew I could get him to talk. And I worked with him, and they worked with him. Now, he's not conversational, and at 19 years old, he is not what you would expect as a 19-year-old. He's when you're on the spectrum, you're all over. In some ways, he acts like a 19-year-old, and in some ways, he acts like a 4-year-old. And I can't imagine how hard it is to be in his body with all that chemical crap that goes on with teenagers. and, you know, having to deal with life the way he does. But you know what? He's only known life this way. So, and he has a pretty good life. But that is my journey to the diagnosis. And I'm quite sure that everybody has their own story. But that's how it was almost 17 years ago. And I don't know what it's like today, but if your child's on the spectrum, I would love to know what your journey to the diagnosis or classification was. So anyway, a much more positive story about autism than the last one. And there are good stories, you know, about my son's progress. And I hope to share more of those with you. So anyway, YouTubers, really like you guys. Can't wait to talk to you again. Have an awesome weekend.